So hello and welcome to your first 15 minutes of therapy. My name is Andreas. I'm a psychologist and a psychotherapist, and we have been developing a platform called Shrink.
And I'm Claire Laron, and I've been collaborating with Andreas for a while now on this new adventure. And I suppose maybe just to give a bit of background about who we are. So I've known you, Andreas, for a long time now, maybe about 15, 20 years. And we've been sort of on this journey. It's sort of grown, hasn't it, over a number of years. And do you want to maybe start by talking about how you came to the idea of innovating in this area and your understanding that actually we needed to look at mental health differently and how we look after mental health and what services we provide for people, which I think is a point that's become really, really relevant, particularly with what's happening at the moment in terms of a real crisis in mental health that can't really be met by services that are available at the moment. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure, and I think absolutely. I think it's sort of, I mean, it's Mental Health Awareness Week this week, which we thought is quite a good time to broaden the conversation a bit on mental health, because everyone will know that even before the pandemic, there was a lot more interest in mental health. All of a sudden, it really kind of hit home that this was an aspect of health that was really rather important. And then with the pandemic, of course, there's lots of things about actually saying that COVID, yes, but also with that and around it, there's also this whole mental health pandemic, and people find it being really rather psychologically affected by lockdown, by all these kind of things. And yet, at the same time, over these past couple of years, also a sense, I think, that the sort of the way mental health was being treated felt very, very similar, became very prescriptive. The choices that were being offered were very much about, okay, well, take some pills and you'll probably feel better, or there's cognitive behavioral strategies and just go to a couple of sessions with that, and that will also make you feel better. So a lot of the conversation had gone to fixing something, and psychotherapists and psychologists are not like dentists. It's not the case that you kind of say, I've got pain in my tooth and let's a professional fix it for you. I think psychotherapy is much more about uncovering things. It's much more about you having to do the work in a way, and that's quite a difficult step, I think, for people to take. So there's the barriers that were there initially with this thing. You probably have to be mad before you go and see a shrink. Has now sort of shifted to, okay, I now know that everyone can go and seek help, but then I want them to do stuff to me and somehow fix it for me. Does that make sense?
I think so, and I think it's interesting that therapists understand that therapy is a journey, but I think that most people probably, and I'd need to look at the research on this, you might know the answer to this, but most people probably wait to go and see a therapist until they really think they need fixing. So although people are becoming more and more curious about their mental health, and it's talked about a lot more than it was in the past, I think that there is normally a trigger that is some kind of crisis or the anticipation or fear of a crisis that will push someone to go and see a therapist. They won't probably think to themselves, I'm a young person. I know that in my life I'm going to experience ups and downs, and so therefore I'm going to get to know myself better and get to understand myself better, and to equip myself on this journey of life, I'm going to go and see a therapist. I don't think that that's the internal narrative that most people have when they think about therapy, and I think that's what we've been trying to change, actually, in the discussion that we've been having.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think we can all just reflect for ourselves, when do we ask for help? Sometimes it takes us a very, very long time before we even figure out that we need help. And then the idea somehow that we need to go and actually ask someone else to help us, where we start feeling that actually probably we should know how to deal with this. There's a lot of shame still around seeking psychological help. And then even if you kind of then finally admit, or your friends tell you, you need to kind of go and see a professional around this, then still what do you do? I think it's still quite hard to then figure out, is this a psychiatrist, is it a psychoanalyst, is it a therapist, is it a counselor? Who are these people? What do they do? What are the differences? So I think there's a lot of mystique still around that as well. There's a cost as well. This is not cheap to go and do that. And if, yes, you can get it for free on the NHS as well, but then the waiting times there are incredibly long for help. So I think we sort of have this, even without the pandemic, we have this rather perfect little storm where we've been telling people you need to kind of, look after your mental health. And then if people say, okay, I will go and ask for some help, where do they go? And I think that's really one of the sort of the starting points that we had to kind of thinking, how can we make psychotherapy and psychological help far more accessible and democratize it?
Yes. And so if we think about what the purpose of Shrink is, how would we, for our viewers who don't know what Shrink is, maybe we should say a couple of words about it in a minute or so. Do you want to start with that, Andreas?
Sure. So really what we kind of thought is that, each individual, of course, is unique and has unique issues that they're dealing with. But if you kind of look, and this is sort of not just from my 2 decades of clinical experience, my colleagues, it's the literature, the research around all of this, there are patterns that people bring. There are certain fundamentals that people bring to a therapy session. And one of those would be around how we make decisions. People find it quite tricky to kind of make decisions. Maybe we unpack that a little bit later. A second big area is this whole area of other people. How do we manage our relationships? People get into relationships, they go out of relationships. There's no manual to kind of teach you how to do that. And people can get very, very stuck in all of that. And then I think the third area is how do we make sense of ourselves? What's it all about? I sort of, get these strange thoughts or feelings sometimes, and I don't quite know what it is. And I might feel a bit anxious about it. I might feel a bit down about it, and all of that. So I think you'd be hard pushed to really think that there's any issue that someone brings into a consulting room or into a Zoom session will not kind of fall into one of these fundamental areas of human existence, the decision making, the relationship, and then the sense making of ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we call those the 3 fundamentals of mental health. And I think if we, going back to the pandemic, because that's on a lot of people's minds at the moment, and mental health is being talked about a lot in that context. I suppose if we think about the way a lot of people have reacted to that pandemic, then we can see how the things that have happened fall into those sorts of categories. So, at the outset, there was huge amount of panic and fear and uncertainty, and that exhibited itself in kind of many often confusing ways. So why was it that people felt the need to rush to the nearest supermarket and buy loo roll? What was that about? And how did people feel within themselves? Because they were being criticized by the media for doing it, and yet they felt unable to stop themselves. So I think that was obviously, provoking in people these feelings of lack of control, or whatever it was that was making them react internally in that way. So that's people maybe feeling a bit confused about themselves. And then there was the pressure, the immediate pressure on relationships, people thrown often into very small physical spaces where they were forced to spend lots of time together where they weren't used to it. So people who would normally be going to school were at home, or very young kids were no longer at nursery, couples were together in small spaces, or people were separated for long periods of time from parents and daughters and so on. So relationships were put under huge strain. And I think one of the biggest things was this sense of that all decision-making, even about who you could hug, and who you could touch and who you could see and where you could go, all those decisions were taken away from us. And so people then, I think, started to find other ways of exerting control and making decisions. And often those could be positive, but often they could be quite negative as well, and manifest themselves in psychological distress and disorders that involve decisions like the decision to eat a lot or not to eat, the decision to drink alcohol, or the decision to take drugs, those kinds of things.
So I think, yes, I think you illustrate that really well in those three areas with the pandemic, and still ongoing as well. Decisions, lots of decisions being taken away from us, sure, but progressively now, more and more decisions are being brought back into it. And if we look at the moment, why we find decisions so tricky is because in any decision we make, there is a loss involved. Whatever we choose, whatever we decide, we also unchoose lots and lots of alternatives around that. And that's always a trick. I mean, people talk about procrastination, for example, and a lot of people talk about procrastination during this pandemic, feeling that, you're there, you've got your space to work, and still you can't quite feel productive. Very much to do with almost the tyranny of these options that are in front of you, and you just feel almost impotent to make a decision, to make a choice, because there's so many alternatives. Do you, like you said, do you hug? Do you not hug? Who do you hug? Can you take a risk? Can you not take a risk? Are you putting other people in danger? Are you putting yourself in danger? Lots of micro decisions around all of this that have massive, big repercussions. And then, being locked up, even with the people you love, and especially with the people you love, put a huge amount of strain on relationships, because for many people, their prime relationships can only really function because there are external influences that you kind of think, okay, well, actually, yes, this person I have chosen to spend my life with, I know they can't offer me absolutely everything. I do need other people to kind of, complement that main relationship. Or for people who are not in a relationship and had to kind of be on their own in isolation. Very difficult sort of dilemmas were all of a sudden presented to us, and how, who are we in a relationship? How do we function? And that, I think, are things that shrink can really help with, because
yeah. And I suppose the idea, going back to shrink then, is that it allows people to start thinking in those terms and to work through those issues without the need necessarily to go straight into a psychotherapy relationship or contract. And I suppose our idea came from the awareness that well-being and mental health has become much more common in terms of the way it's thought about and understood as a priority, and that there are certain apps already out there that have kind of moved very slowly into that space, although much more in a kind of, let's manage symptoms, let's manage anxieties, let's do some meditation and maybe some storytelling to help people sleep and so on. So we've had the Calms and the Headspaces who've kind of set the ground, but that has been very much around symptom management. So how do I cope with my anxiety rather than how do I understand where it comes from? And so I suppose shrink for us was sort of the natural next step into, okay, we've done some bringing ourselves into the moment, some mindfulness, some coping tactics. Now let's dig a bit deeper and actually do the work of understanding why these things are happening to us. And that's where it starts.
Beyond the symptom, I think a lot of the time things are being addressed, as you point out, kind of do some breathing, do some relaxation, let's get you to sleep, and that's all great. And I think it's very much part of it. I mean, and we start with breathing exercises for some of the exercises as well, because it's just a very nice way of getting you in the right frame to kind of start considering what's going on with yourself. But it is not enough. I think there is something else that needs doing. So it's the same way that going and having a cup of tea or a coffee with a friend, is therapeutic, but it's not therapy. Equally, a breathing exercise is therapeutic and relaxation, but it's not going to shift anything. It's not going to change something. And what we're hoping, I think, with Shrink, is to be able to bring people without necessarily needing to go and see a person, helping them gain that little bit of insight into themselves, seeing patterns. For example, with our mood tracker, we kind of look at, why is it, every Tuesday morning I feel down. Is there something about Tuesday mornings? Who am I meeting on those days? What does it represent for me? So I think seeing those kind of patterns is not something necessarily that you need another person for, but it gives you some more insight. And of course, if you then feel you do want to go and talk to someone, you already have something to kind of articulate. You have something to talk about already.
Yeah. So that people understand what the proposition is with Shrink, what the basic idea of it is. And I think Shrink is well chosen as a name, because essentially what we've been trying to do is take therapy and reduce it. Firstly, so that you can kind of access it on a small screen size device. And secondly, so that it isn't the kind of major commitment that it can often be seen to be, that is off-putting for so many people. So the idea about Shrink is you access it when you want, that you do it online, therefore you can do it wherever you want. You don't have to go to a clinic, and that it lasts maybe 5 or 10 minutes, your interaction with the device and with the app. And in that period of time, you learn something valuable about yourself, or you take a step on that journey. So you monitor your mood, or you do one of our 3 exercises that helps you know yourself, make better decisions, or improve your relationships. Those are the core functions. And when you first arrive at Shrink, you're given a questionnaire so that we can get to know you a bit better and point you in the right direction of where we think we can offer you the most help in terms of which exercise you should be trying first. So you're not left completely on your own. And before any exercise, there's also a breathing, really important breath work, so that you're calm down, you can stop worrying about everything going on outside. You just bring yourself into your own space, and you're ready to do that 5 or 10 minutes of work before you then go on and get on with your day. So it's really, we've always described it as like a mental health hygiene. So just like you clean your teeth every day, you also check in with Shrink, and you think about how you are, and then you do a bit of work on something that's on your mind, and then you move on, and then you come back to it the next day, so that it's just all about keeping on top of how you are and gradually building up this knowledge and understanding of yourself over time.
It's therapy in your pocket, and it's there for you whenever it suits you. It's not a huge sort of investment of time. It's a free resource as well, and we'd urge you to try it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's probably all we need to talk about today.